When I speak to other women of color who are living with mental health challenges, I often hear characteristics of my own story pop up in theirs. In so many cultures from which we come, mental illness is to be feared and or ignored. I treasure my Chineseness. I do not treasure the silence that it often implies. This story begins in winter. It's my sophomore year in college, and I'm in the psychiatric hospital for the second time in a year. I finally reached the level of privileges during my stay when I can leave the premises with a chaperone. I'm with my father, who's finally flown from China to see me. We're walking through the slush in silence, not having much to say. Finally, he stops. He turns to me and he says, "I don't know who you are anymore. I don't even know if I can trust you." Despite my icy demeanor toward the nurses and doctors over the last week, I can't help but cry when he says this. He puts his arms around me, and we hold one another as it begins to snow. He wasn't trying to hurt me. As a child, I proved to be an overachiever early on, able to read at 2, writing not long afterward, and designing elaborate assignments for myself through elementary school. A history of childhood trauma compounded the difficulties I may have already had. By 11, insomnia, anxiety, depression. By 13, self-harm. By 16, I'd officially entered the mental health system. First, I was crying and talking about death, then I was doing 10 things at a time and not sleeping for days. By my early 20s, I was seeing trains where there were none and hearing voices that told me that they hated me. Along the way, there have been multiple involuntary hospitalizations. Not long after that winter walk, my school asked me to leave. None of this had been what either of my immigrant parents expected of me. Becoming a doctor or a lawyer? Hell yes. Put in a psychiatric hospital multiple times, unable to graduate from the Ivy League school they've been so proud to see me attend? Not really. Mental illness can be hard to understand, and as a woman of color who had lived with schizoaffective disorder for most of her life, mental illness is a topic that's introduced me to stigma and discrimination, as well as hope. In the end, though, my story is really a story about love. This is what a psychotic episode is often like for me. In the beginning, I find myself unable to speak for more than 4 or 5 words at a time, as if language has been vacuumed from my brain, which is pretty frightening for someone who makes her living as a writer. I'm often unable to move, or rather my brain forgets to tell my body that moving is important because of avolition, the medically fancy way of saying that I lose the motivation to do pretty much anything. I don't brush my teeth. I forget to feed my dog, whom I love. After a while, I start to believe things that aren't true. The common belief that comes to me during these times is that everyone I love has been replaced by a robot, and so I won't let my husband hug me. A few years ago, I believed that I was dead. Prejudice and discrimination are experiences that I've had as a result of my mental health challenges in a myriad of ways, but the difficulties that I face with my family's beliefs and reactions based on their culturally tinged and stigmatized views of mental illness impacted me the most. I've talked to both of my parents extensively about how their beliefs and fears affected me. They're now an enormous part of my support system, but when I first told my mom as a high schooler that I needed to see a psychiatrist, she screamed at me. I decided to tell her at the dining room table before school, which is definitely a mistake because she yelled at me as though I told her that I'd crashed the family car through the garage door. "How would you do this to me?" she asked. "We've always given you everything you needed." I skipped first period, hiding in the argument and crying. My mom has always loved me, but back then she had a lot of denial and a lot of mistaken beliefs about mental illness. She thought that I was doing it, whatever it was, on purpose. She thought that if she acted as though it didn't exist, it would go away. When I finally did go to a psychiatrist, he asked her if there was any history of mental illness in our family. She said no. I later learned that this was completely untrue. She'd witnessed her own aunt, who lived with her in her childhood, experience psychotic breaks. She had a cousin who committed suicide, but I didn't know this at the time. Part of her silence was a cultural taboo she'd carried over. 我们不讲这种东西. Essentially, Chinese people don't talk about these things, and especially not with strangers. That aunt had been literally locked in the attic because my mother's family was too ashamed to let anyone know about her illness. And life with a mental illness is, without a doubt, challenging. But I'm going to end this talk with part of an email that my mom sent to me. Mommy has faith in you. Enjoy your new plan. Live out the beauty of her life like a beautiful butterfly. Break through the cocoon and fly free. I love you. I've taken that with me. I carry it with me. There are things that I've struggled with, including cultural stigma and self-stigma, but these are things that I face now with a stronger heart. And thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak to you about something that matters so much to me and to so many other women.